I want to support the amendment as proposed, because I think the Sinn Féin amendment does actually call for oversight on this, and it's completely lacking anywhere else. You see, it's been said earlier on that we couldn't pass extension maternity leave last night because it was too complex. And what we're looking at here is seriously complex, and we're not getting the clarity that we deserve on it. I think, to be honest with you, it's beyond the understanding of most of us in this House what's going on here. But we do understand the urgency, and we do accept that this is a gigantic stimulus package that is needed. Within the COVID and post-COVID, whenever we come out of COVID, that small and medium businesses and workers can begin to operate again following what will probably be a recession from the pandemic. You couldn't argue it, you couldn't oppose it, but it seems to me that what we have is a sort of a Dáil made up of born-again Keynesians that now see that stimulating the economy, putting money into services, into public services, into jobs with small and medium businesses is how you do what the left have been saying for years, that you inject resources into the economy to stimulate it. Now that seems to be the wisdom of the hallowed halls of the finance ministries. You wouldn't know it from the debate here in this House, but in Europe there's another debate raging, and that debate has a lot to do with how these funds should be spent and how much of it should be loans, how much of it should be grants. Also, very interestingly, they're talking about reforms being attached to them, and this is where I want to make my most important contribution, because people in this country will remember that word well, particularly if they were those who were described by the former Minister for Finance as the low-hanging fruit, those at the bottom of society who depended on the welfare state or who suffered from disability, or indeed if they were public sector workers. Reform always equal to tax on pensions, on labour rights, on the welfare state itself, and indeed on the privatisation of our public services. So clearly that debate has not ended. And I know I can hear the cliche being trotted out in my ears, there's no money tree. There's no magic money tree. I accept there's no magic money tree, but we seem to forget that when it comes to tax havens, like what we saw with Apple today, the Cayman Islands, the Double Dutch, and indeed what is the Irish tax haven. And there are other sort of clever ideas being floated around by the EU Commission, that there should be a suite of environmental taxes, such as carbon taxes and taxes on plastic. Who could argue with that? But the problem is that it doesn't do what it says on the tin. It is usually passed on to ordinary people and not to the big companies. I'll wind up now. But because the details are scant, I think it's very important that we do have a level of scrutiny applied to this bill. And I think that we are going to need, for example, for the state to answer questions. We were told earlier on that the wage subsidy scheme, for example, could apply retrospectively. Well, we do have giant companies in this country, like Ryanair, Boston Scientific, who put their hands out for that wage subsidy scheme, and we had no scrutiny over their profits or their cash reserves or anything else, and yet we paid out that wage subsidy scheme to them. So there is a concern about how this fund will be used, where it will go to, and as we demand individual responsibility from all of us, we also have to demand corporate responsibility and to have some kind of scrutiny on how this money is given out. I think, the Minister, it would be important for us to comment here on what the debate is raging in Europe, what that's about, and how that will impact on whether or not we pass this here today. Because we do have to actually come out of this pandemic with a notion of a caring society, a society that wants to repair the damage done. And if we are to learn lessons, we need to learn lessons about investment in our public services. We've seen the void and the gap that's been created in health, in childcare, in public transport, in education, all of those areas that need to be invested in. And we don't want to end up, when we strip the spin away from this particular scheme, that if we look back, we're not looking back at a package and funding that is really dressed up as austerity and a corporate bailout Mark II. And I think we need to understand how that debate is taking place in Europe and how that will impact on what we do here.
Minister. Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Just responding to Deputy Doherty's first amendment. So unfortunately, I can't accept the amendment as we had the discussion that we had there during the interruption. Article 11 of the SURE regulation states that Member States' guarantees must be irrevocable, unconditional and on demand. The proposed amendment would in effect make the SURE guarantee agreement signed by Ireland a conditional one rather than an unconditional one as is required. It would have the effect of pricing additional risk into the borrowings that the European Union Commission seek in the market, making the cost of borrowing higher and defeating the purpose of the instrument, that is to make loans available to the pandemic-hit Member States and to the support of citizens. On receipt of a demand notice from the Commission under the SURE guarantee, guarantors, including Ireland, will have a maximum of 10 business days to make payments. In passing the legislation, the Oireachtas will be accepting this stringent timescale, which was agreed after lengthy negotiation between the Member States and the Commission. Should a demand be made, for example, during a period of Dáil recess, it would be impossible to comply with the provisions of the guarantee if the amendment was agreed to. In the case of the SURE guarantee, failure to meet the timeframe for payment under the guarantee would put Ireland in a technical sovereign default. And just in relation to the point that was raised by Deputy Smith, actually, tomorrow's European Council meeting is focusing exactly on what Deputy Smith has referred to, the balance between grants and loans and how that will play into the multi-annual financial framework, which will be the European Union's budget for the next coming number of years. So thanks, Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you very much.